People joining us from all over the world. So very excited to kick off and welcome all of you to actually what's our first ever at Marquee sort of free open, 1 hour webinar. And we decided to offer this today. So I'm going to do a quick 5-minute introduction and tell you a little bit about who I am and what the plan is here for this hour, and then turn it over to one of my colleagues, Jamie Wilkie, who's going to be leading today's webinar and show you some what I think and we all think are some pretty powerful, cool things in a whole new direction in terms of Microsoft Excel. So for those of you who I haven't met, that's many of you, my name is Ian Schnur. I'm the founder and president of Marquee, the Marquee Group. Started the firm's been around for almost 20 years now, and we are based in Toronto, Canada, and run courses. We are focused in the field of financial modeling. So we run training and we offer consulting in the field of financial modeling. We run courses mostly to banks and large financial institutions and pension funds and large companies, and dozens of business schools and programs all over the world. And our courses focus, if you've been to our website, our courses focus on financial modeling, different types of modeling. We have a number of advanced Excel courses and data science courses. Essentially what we do is try and teach people the skills that they need in an accounting or finance or business environment to succeed in data analytics. And so that's a little bit about who we are. Again, I imagine if you haven't been to our website, feel free to please check it out. You can also, if you haven't, you can follow us on LinkedIn, on Instagram. If you've got your phones near you, we've got an Instagram page, and we're always trying to put out tips. We have a newsletter. We're always distributing tips and skills through our newsletter as well. So please feel free to follow us to know kind of what's going on. As I said, this is the first webinar we're doing, and it kind of came about because our evolution, our focus had always been classroom training, but with COVID, we migrated to video-based webinar training, and we chose this particular topic as the topic of our first set of free webinar, which is this topic on dynamic arrays. I was at a conference earlier this year. I was at a dynamic conference, sort of a web-based conference earlier this year on modeling in Excel. And one of the top Excel developers was at the conference, and he gave a talk, and he's described this particular change at Excel. There's a team of Excel, including a number of data scientists and programmers, and they describe this particular change as the single largest, most important change for the future of Excel. The largest single event that's happened there, this is how they're characterizing it at Microsoft, the largest thing that's happened at Excel in 20 or 30 years, and the most important thing in their mind about the future of Excel. So for those of you who've used Excel, imagine all of you have, and you're going to continue using it. This is not my opinion. This is what Microsoft would tell you is the most important change that they have seen, or that they're been working on for a long time. This is the future in their minds of Excel. It's called dynamic arrays, and my colleague, Jamie, as I said, who's in Calgary, is going to lead the session. Just a very couple quick housekeeping items before we jump in. If you have questions, please add them in the chat, and we'll try and get to some of them during the session. I'll let Jamie know we've got a bit of a shared document going here. So if you have questions, please put them in. You're also welcome to email us. If we don't cover a question, please feel free to email us or reach out. Our email addresses are on the contact page of our website, so you're welcome to get to us that way. You're welcome. I see a lot of you have your cameras on, which is great. You can keep them on, you can keep them off, whatever you like. We are recording the session in case someone wants to watch it after, but your names will not be recorded. Your screens will not be recorded. It's just Jamie and his screen that will be recorded. We will make it available on our site if you want it for future reference. So the last thing I'm going to do before I turn it over to Jamie is this. We are now, given that there's a lot of material to unpack and to kind of look at in dynamic arrays. So we're actually looking at doing a training session, a half-day training session where we get into more depth and we have some questions. And just out of curiosity, Jamie wants to run a quick poll here. So he's going to put up a quick poll just to ask where people are. If you can see this poll on the screen. The nice thing about webinars is we run them all over the world now. So if you have a chance to quickly click off what time zone here best approximates where you are, that will just help us think about future programming and some of the things that we do. So I can already see a whole bunch of you. Thank you very much. We've got a whole bunch in Eastern time and a bunch in Pacific time, but people coming from all over. So thank you very much for that. So on that note, I would love to turn it over to Jamie. Jamie is one of the principals at the Marquee Group. As I said, he's based in Calgary. Jamie has tremendous depth and background and experience in finance. He spent about 15 years as an investment banker focused on modeling and with a deep expertise in oil and gas. He is a self-professed Excel nerd like the rest of us and loves getting into and understanding the power of it, and really took a real interest in this particular new development at Microsoft and Excel, and is here to lead the session today. So on that note, Jamie, I want to turn it over to you. I want to welcome you all. Please be in touch with us, and hope you enjoy this webinar.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you everybody for joining. Incredible to see the turnout for this. We were kind of guessing how many people would actually show up for a free webinar over the lunch hour on a Thursday, and we're thrilled with the turnout that we've had so far. So I'm going to share my screen, and this is kind of what I'm going to spend the rest of this session doing. Is we obviously teach in Excel, so I'm going to spend all my time in Excel. So I think just the turnout that we're seeing here just speaks to the wide reach and power that Excel has. Ian touched a bit on my background, so I won't spend much more time on that. I am a capital markets person by background, just like the rest of us are at Marquee, and I joined the firm last year. So I've been thrilled with it since then. Spent a lot of my time on teaching, do a little bit of consulting with Marquee Group as well. We will send out some additional information on this training that we're hoping to offer, a more in-depth training session that includes our typical style of training, where we'll have assignments and work sessions and all of those sorts of things. And we will email that out to anybody who signed up for the session probably sometime next week. So so keep your eyes peeled for that. I love to see this many Excel dorks in a room. Anybody who signs up for a session over the lunch hour to learn about Excel is by definition Excel dork, and I don't use that term pejoratively. That is a term of endearment for me. So so welcome. I'm glad to have you all here. What we're here to talk about today are some big changes to Excel that are in the pipeline, and in particular, the changes that are being rolled out in the Microsoft 365 version of Excel. So it's not very often that we get to talk about major changes to features in Excel. I'm going to take some notes throughout the day today, and I will provide this file at the end of the session as well in our chat, just if anybody's interested in having this file on hand as well. So Excel historically has been a very slow-moving beast, right? There are 750 million people, that's the estimate right now, using Excel worldwide at any point in time. So there's 750 million users. When you've got that kind of a user base, it's absolutely critical that your product is rock solid and backward compatible. There's multiple versions floating around out there. So you don't see massive changes all that often. The current channel, the most up-to-date channel of Microsoft 365, in early 22, they rolled out some big alterations to core functionality. So just thinking about what that functionality means, historically, you typed in a formula into a cell in Excel, you got an answer in a single cell. That was just how it worked. And look, we know there were more complex ways to enter formulas. There were what was called array formulas in older versions of Excel, but they were quite complex, and they had some complications associated with them, and that served as a barrier to entry to a lot of people. We think this new way of doing things in Excel will be a lot more accessible to a lot wider audience. So I think you're going to see these dynamic arrays get adopted at a much higher rate than the historical version of array formulas got adopted. So what are we talking about? Dynamic arrays in Excel. The idea behind these is I can type a formula into a single cell, and I will have answers spill out of that single cell into a range of cells. They will populate an entire range of cells. This is a fundamental change to how Excel works. We're no longer tied to that one formula, one answer type of paradigm. So I'm just going to give you some quick examples of how this works. I've got a small data set here, just some random numbers. The old version of Excel, the way that we would do things is we would give Excel references to cells. I can add two numbers together, hit enter. I get an answer, right? One formula, one answer. That's how it always worked. We could also use formulas like the sum formula, and give Excel a range of numbers to add up. And that would obviously work totally fine as well. It's still one formula, one answer. But what's changed now is I can, instead of using a formula, I can give a reference to an entire range of cells. So I can just refer to this data table, this whole data table. I'm not applying any kind of formula here. I'm not doing any math. And when I hit enter, what happens is that whole table spills out of this cell that I entered the formula into. So it's important that we understand fundamentally how this is working. I only entered one single formula. This cell here with the red text is the cell that I entered a formula into. And if we look at the formula bar, we can see it is in black text. It's in black text. That means that this is a formula entered directly into this cell. These other cells, the formula bar shows gray text. And what this is Excel telling me is that it's telling me that nobody's entered a formula into this cell. I'm showing numbers in this cell, but they are spilled out of a different cell as a result of a dynamic array formula. So this is a big change, and you can see they've highlighted that range in blue. This is just telling you, hey, this is a spilled range. So it's really visual, and it allows you to see where you're dealing with these spilled ranges. So that's a big change. We haven't seen anything like that before. If we think about how we used to do math on these types of numbers, we used to be able to multiply two numbers together, right? Something like this. And then we would always have to copy that formula and paste it down our rows, right? That's how we did multiple cells worth of math. But no longer. Now in Excel, I can take this first range of numbers, 1 to 4, and I can multiply that by the second range of numbers, 5 to 8. And when I hit enter, I get all of those answers. They spill out. I only had to enter one formula. So this is changing the game. We don't have to copy and paste our formulas around anymore in Excel. So big change. Do I have access to it? That's what a lot of people's question is. First question is when they see this. So how can I use this Voodoo? How do I know if I have access to it? How you know if you have access? Well, it's only Office 365 that has access to it. The older versions of Office on PC, 2019, 2016, I am terribly partial to Excel 2003. That was the one that I learned on, so I still think it's the best Excel. None of those older versions have access to this functionality. I put the version numbers in these notes here. That's how you're able to tell if you have access. But honestly, the easiest way to tell if you have access is if you're in a spreadsheet and you start typing equals sort. If you get suggestions for a sort function or a sort by function, you have access to dynamic arrays. So that's how we can tell if we have them. Now, how can we use them, right? So this ability that I demoed above is a big change to how Excel works. But to take advantage of this change, Excel also introduced a bunch of new functions. And these new functions can be really helpful to help us do analysis tasks that were a lot more challenging previously. So I want to talk about a few new functions that we can use to take advantage of dynamic arrays. And the way that I'm going to talk about this is I am going to use a data set. If you've ever taken an Excel course from the Marquee Group, this data set is going to look awfully familiar to you. It is a list of financings, about 560 financings long, from 2006. So super recent data that we're dealing with here. But we use this for a lot of our courses that we teach. It's just a great data set. When I look at a data set like this, I'll often have to sort or filter or do work on this data set in order to get an answer to a question that I want to get. With dynamic arrays, one of the great things that we can do is we can get those answers in a lot easier way. For example, one of the questions that you might want to know about a list of data like this is, who were all the lead underwriters that did deals during 2006, in this list that I have? I want a list of all of the underwriters, but I don't want them duplicated, right? So I could copy and paste this list, but I don't want them duplicated. I just want each underwriter in this list listed once. And there's a couple of ways that we could do that historically in Excel, but none of them were particularly easy. We could use under the data tab, we could use an advanced filter in order to get just unique names. We could also use something called remove duplicates. And there were some really complicated array formula ways that we could make this work. But Excel has made that dramatically simpler. This was always one of the things that frustrated me a lot about Excel. Getting a list of unique entries from a database should be a relatively easy task. Now it is. We're going to use something called the, equals unique. The unique function asks us for an array of data, right? I'm going to give it an array of data that includes all of those underwriter names. And I'm going to hit enter. And it gives me an entire list of every single underwriter in that list. There are 27 of them. It has listed them all as unique entries in that list. So much quicker than the old way that we had to do things. And this alone is worth the price of admission to me as far as Excel 365 goes. But there's a lot more that we can also do. So the next thing that we might want to do, I have this list of unique underwriter names, but in a lot of cases, I want these lists to appear in, call it alphabetical order, some other sort of sort. Right now, I've just got them in chronological order, right? So I want to resort this list in alphabetical order. Well, there is another new function in Excel 365 called the sort function. And the sort function, again, asks me for an array, and then I need to give it some parameters. In this case, I don't really need any of these extra parameters. I'm just going to give it this array of names, and it will sort them all alphabetically for me. So I am going to give it a reference to this entire list of underwriter names. I'm saying sort that list of underwriter names, but wait a minute, something strange has happened to Excel here. This is starting to look like Twitter. We've got hashtags going on here, number signs showing up in formulas. What in the heck are we dealing with? Well, I want to introduce what I think is one of the more powerful features of dynamic arrays, and that is we are able to refer to an entire spilled array by giving a reference to a single cell, the cell that I put the formula name in, or the formula in, and following it up with the number sign, right? So I'm telling it, I entered a formula in cell H3. By including the number sign, I'm telling it, include all of the information that's spilled out of cell H3. If I close my brackets and I hit enter, it is now capturing all of the data in this list with a reference to a single cell. And so why is this valuable? Well, this is valuable because these lists may change over time, right? For example, maybe we found an error in our database, and maybe Lehman Brothers was actually, the US Bank NA deal, the first deal in our list, maybe that was actually underwritten by Jamie Co. Dream big, right? If I change that, my unique function automatically updates. It adds that new company to my list. I now have 28 companies in my list. And that sort function now captures that additional entry in my list of unique underwriter names. So this, it's called the spilled range operator. The number sign is really, really valuable when we start trying to use these formulas in Excel. So I'm just going to put in some notes on some of the formulas that we've talked about here. Unique is the first one, and then I've got some notes on the spilled range operator. That spilled range operator, if you've taken our Excel 2 course or some of our other Excel courses, we would have talked about something called dynamic named ranges, and we had to use an offset and the name manager, and it was a fairly complex process to sort of accomplish this type of goal. We can do it now just using this number sign operator. So it can be really helpful if I need to sum up a dynamic range. I want to make sure that I'm always capturing all of the data in that. And we'll talk about this feature throughout our talk today. So already, my apologies, I'm jumping around the screen here. Already I'm seeing some value in using dynamic arrays, but I want to talk about the limitation of what we just did, of how I just built this. One of the issues with big lists of data like this is that they will inevitably grow in size, right? They will inevitably grow in size. On July 1st of 2006, we might have another new deal. Maybe this is a deal by the Marquee Group, and the Marquee Group is doing an initial public offering, and that initial public offering is $2 billion. And we like to keep our business close to home, so maybe this is going to go to John Co. LLC. We'll put in some legal definitions there. John Zellman, one of our other principals, is going to lead this initial public offering on our behalf. When I add that name to the bottom of our list, our dynamic array did not grow. It didn't capture that new data, right? And so this is a problem when we refer to defined ranges, right? I am missing that new deal that I added to the bottom of this list. But Excel has a tool that helps us to deal with this, right? And this isn't new to dynamic arrays. It just plays really well with dynamic arrays. And that tool is the table tool. So for any database, we can easily insert a table, right? And what a table does is it's going to grab your whole list of data and it's going to apply a name to it, right? It's essentially going to make a table that grows in size as you add new information to the bottom of it. So I'm creating a table here. This table now includes that John Co. led deal at the bottom of this list. And that table will now grow in size. But I can refer to this table using my dynamic array functions. So one of the things that I want to do first is under table design, I'm able to give these tables names. It just makes it a lot easier to refer to these in the future. So the name that I'm going to give this table is data. That's my data table that I'm going to be working with from now on. And now I'm going to make a minor modification to my unique function. Instead of referring to that defined list of cells, what I'm going to do is I am going to refer to the data table. And in particular, within that data table, I am going to ask it to look in the lead underwriter column. In the lead underwriter column, so I want it to get me a unique list of all of the entries in the lead underwriter column of the data table. And when I hit enter on that formula, I do now capture John Co. LLC, and we see that my sorted version of this list has also updated to include John Co. LLC. So this combination of table tool with dynamic arrays is really, really powerful, because now as my list grows in the future, 7/2/2006, we'll have the Marquee Consulting Royalty Corp. This is going to be our financing vehicle that we're going to use for the Marquee Group. It is going to do an initial public offering. Maybe it's a little smaller deal. This is kind of the sidecar. And this is done by Ian and Company, underwritten by Ian and Company. Now, when I go up to my list, it automatically updates to include Ian and Company, both in the raw sorted list and in the sorted version of my unique list. Right? So these two tools play really well together, the table tool and dynamic arrays. So sort is really helpful, but I would like to get into what I think is the most powerful function that we have with dynamic arrays, and that's something called the filter function, right? So we've all had to filter lists before. I had to do it too many times with financing databases like this. I want to get a subset of that list. And let's say, for example, I want to get all of the deals by Lehman Brothers, right? So I want to get all of the deals by Lehman Brothers. We spend a ton of time in our Excel 1 course talking about different ways to get this. There is the filter tool in Excel. There's the advanced filter, which overcomes some of the shortcomings of the filter tool. But Excel has introduced a function that takes advantage of these dynamic arrays in order to spill an entire list in one step. So what we're going to talk about is filter function. And the filter function requires an array of data that we're going to filter. In our case, the array of data that we're going to filter is just our full database, data, the table that we gave a name to. And then we need to tell it what information we want to include. So in this case, what I'm going to tell it is, within the data table, I want you to look at the lead underwriter column. And with the lead underwriter column, I want you to get me instances where the lead underwriter is equal to Lehman Brothers. The last thing I can enter is just, what do you want me to show if there's no, nothing that meets this filter criteria, right? So I can tell it show no results found if it doesn't find anything. And if I hit enter, it automatically filters that list except what's happened? No results found. I just wanted to show that no results found works. And the reason that it's not finding any results is I've got an extra space in between Lehman and Brothers here. As soon as I put in the correct spelling, we'll see that it automatically updates to get me the full list of Lehman Brothers deals. If I don't want Lehman Brothers, if I want Goldman Sachs, I can get a list of Goldman Sachs deals. If I don't want Goldman Sachs, if I want Merrill Lynch, I can get a full list of Merrill Lynch deals. Really, really powerful tool that we can use in order to build lists on the fly. So I can invest some time building this formula up front and now have a formatted list that looks exactly like it, and I can update it on the fly very, very easily. So the filter tool, I think, is one of the most powerful ones that we've got in the new dynamic arrays suite. So I'm going to put it back to Lehman Brothers because the filter function will also allow us to set multiple criteria. So maybe I want to set a minimum deal size as well. And I want to set a minimum deal size equal to $300 million. When we create our filter functions, there's actually no way to enter a second criteria in here, right? But we can force it to by using a little trick in Excel. We can use some simple arithmetic to start creating more complex filters. And the arithmetic that we're going to use is if I want to create an AND condition for filtering, right? So in this case, I'm looking for deals where the lead underwriter is Lehman Brothers and they are greater than $300 million in size. I can use a asterisk or a multiplication sign to separate a couple of conditions. So I can say lead underwriter is equal to Lehman Brothers and, with the asterisk, the size of the deal is greater than or equal to 300 million. When I close all my brackets and I hit enter, I'm now applying both the size and the underwriter condition to create this table. So I think most people, when they see this, you can see there's some pretty interesting applications that you could use this for, right? Quickly generating tables of deals from a large data set. Very easy application for doing this. We're always filtering for the perfect criteria that makes our bank look the best. We would never do that. We're 100% objective with data all of the time, right? But we're often doing a lot of this filtering on the fly. This is a really great way to do it. The reason I like this as opposed to the filter function in Excel is that I can build this, copy it, paste it, move it to a bunch of different places. It's all still referring back to that original data set. Whereas the filter tool, I had to actually change my original data set. And I don't love that about it. So that's the filter tool. Really, really powerful piece. I can also sort filtered lists, right? So if I wanted to take that filtered list that I created and I wanted to sort it from largest deal to smallest deal, I can do that using this sort function that I talked about. So I'm going to sort my dynamic array. And remember, I can refer to that whole dynamic array just by using that number sign, right? So I'm going to sort that entire dynamic array based on a particular column. So I'm going to give it a sort index. I need to tell it which column to sort based on. Size is the 1, 2, 3, 4th column. So sort it based on column number 4. And I can tell it whether to sort it in ascending or descending order. I want to sort it in descending order. I don't need the last argument here. It quickly sorts that list now from largest size to smallest size. So I can apply functions to functions. I could have done this all in one step. I could have put a filter function inside of a sort function and gotten exactly the list that I wanted right off the hop. So that is the sort function and how we can apply it here. But let's think about taking our entire list and sorting it, right? Sometimes we want to look at the full database, but we just want to sort it by the individual underwriters, right? So I want all of the Bank of America deals together. I want all of the Merrill Lynch deals together, right? And that's absolutely something that we can do. I can sort my original data set, the entire database I'm going to sort, and I'm going to sort it based on column number. I'll tell you, lead underwriter looks like it's column number 5 here, but we've actually hidden a column just to make everything fit better on screen here. So the lead underwriter is actually column number 6 of our original data set. And I'm going to sort it in ascending order, so A to Z order, based on lead underwriter. And if I hit enter, sorry, that should be ascending order. If I hit enter, I get that full database sorted by lead underwriter. Right? So very quickly grabs me the list that I need, sorted the way that I want it. Now, we may want to have secondary sort criteria, right? Anybody who uses the sort tools in Excel knows that you can set a primary search criteria and a secondary search criteria, right? So maybe I want my list to show sorted by lead underwriter first, and then by size, right? So that within each group of deals, within the Bank of America deals, my lead underwriter, or sorry, my largest deals will be at the top of my Bank of America list, right? And I can absolutely do that. I just can't do it with the sort function. I have to use something else. So I'm going to use the sort by function. And let me go back over to my notes for a minute to get myself caught up on what we've been talking about. I talked about the sort function. I talked about the filter function. And I talked about how we can build some pretty sophisticated criteria using plus signs and multiplication signs, right? The filter function also has some really great tie-ins with using data validation. Limiting what somebody's able to put into this cell where they enter the underwriter name would be something that would be really helpful, right? So that's the filter function. The next one I'm going to talk about is sort by. So it's essentially the same function as sort, except I can set a secondary sort criteria or a third sort criteria, or a fourth or fifth, right? In order to get really well-sorted lists exactly the way that I want them to be. So what I need to do is I need to replace my sort function with a sort by function, right? So the sort by function, it still asks me for the first argument for what my database is, what my array of data is that I want to sort. Again, I'm sorting the entire table here, 560 deals on the fly. But the sort by function asks me, which group of data do you want me to sort on first, right? So in our list, the group of data that I want it to sort on first is the lead underwriter, right? So I want it to first sort based on lead underwriter. And then it asks me, what order do you want me to sort on for lead underwriter, right? In our case, we want it to sort lead underwriters based on ascending order, A to Z order, right? The next argument that I can enter, and I can enter multiple additional sorting criteria. The by array 2, the second criteria that I want to sort it based on is the size. So I want to sort it based on size as well. And I want to do that in descending order because I want to start with the biggest deal within each group and work my way down from there. So this sort by function will accomplish the same thing. It's just now taken our Bank of America deals and it's sorted them by size within this list. So this is really good for breaking ties in lists where we want to use a secondary criteria in order to break a tie when we're ranking things, right? So that is our sort by function.
Jamie, is this a good time to take some questions?
Yeah, why don't I stop for a couple of questions?
Why don't I read some through to you? There's some good questions coming through that I think the whole group will find interesting, and maybe we can go through some of them and then see what our timing is like. First question that came in said, what happens when someone with an older version of Excel opens a file? We've all had that happen to us before, and some of these things are included in the file that got sent to them.
Yeah, I was going to close off our session with that, but I might as well hit on it now. In short, that is one of the biggest concerns about using these heavily. These dynamic arrays, when I create dynamic arrays using functions that already exist in Excel. For example, on my notes page, if I were to create dynamic arrays like this, where I'm just including a reference to a range of cells, those will work in older versions of Excel. What Excel will do is it will convert them to the old style of array, right? And so what ends up happening there is you lose the dynamic nature of them, where they can change in size, grow, shrink, all that sort of thing. So those types of references will technically work in Excel, but you might lose, or in older versions of Excel, but you might lose functionality. These functions like filter, unique, sort, will not work in older versions of Excel. So you have to be very careful when we're using these. And that's why I like to point out there's 750 million Excel users. There are 45 million Office 365 users, right? So be very careful. If you're doing work internally, it can be really helpful. But if this has to go to a client or has to go to somebody outside of your firm, be very cautious about using them.
Mm-hmm. I think you were choosing your words carefully on what happens if you open a file and you don't have, we've all experienced that with an older version of Excel where the whole file crashes because someone's put something new in it, and that will be a possibility, won't it, if you're using the new functions?
Possibility, those new functions will not.
They will not work, yes. It will not be a fun day. Another question here says, old array formulas used to carry a lot of memory and processing and could often slow down a file. How have you found that these new features and new array functions tend to work in terms of processing speed?
I find that they're pretty snappy. They work reasonably well. Mind you, we're working on significantly more powerful computers than we have historically in the past. So I haven't noticed any large slowdowns, but I do know if you were to use these very, very heavily in a file, they would have some overhead. You just think about the work that it's doing behind the scene in order to generate these lists. And the fact that it has to update that every time a spreadsheet recalculates. There is some overhead associated with it, but I think it's just a matter of playing with it and finding what the limits are. I haven't pushed it to a spot where I find that this particular feature is bogging down a worksheet yet, but I'm sure there is a line somewhere where that's the case.
Okay, excellent. There was a question on whether we're going to provide the recording. Yeah, I think our plan is we're recording the session we mentioned, and our plan is to post this on our website. So either check back with us or maybe we'll send a note. We'll probably send a note to this group of people who are here to let you know when you can find it. There was a question that said, why would you just showed us a bunch of stuff on the sort function and sort by, and it's a way to sort data. And the question said, why would you ever do that if you can simply use the other sorting? It says the data table sorting, but I think it means within one of the tables or sort of the traditional. I mean, there's a lot of ways to sort data. Well, I guess the question is, why would we use these new sort capability?
Because if I sort this list, I sort my original data set, right? I like the ability to be able to build multiple tables that stand separate from my original data source that are still tied directly to the original data source. So that's the advantage that I see. I might have an output for client A that sits on one tab and it uses a filter function based on the original data set. I might have an output for client B that sits on another tab that's formatted entirely different. They're all still tied to that original data set. And that's, I think, the power that we get by filtering this way.
And I would just add to that is that it's dynamic. And anyone who knows that if you've ever sorted data, it's static. You sort the data and it stays that way. If you add something new, you have to resort your data, right? Whereas these powerful tools, as Jamie demonstrated, if you add something new in the middle of the data, it will automatically resort for you based on your criteria. Refilter, resort. Filter tool is the same, right, Jamie? You filter something,
Yep.
Now you have a static filter. But with these new functions, the filter will continuously update and adapt on its own. So
yeah. So so lots of great ideas behind this, and I do see in that doc now. Sorry, I kind of neglected it a little bit. Somebody was asking.
No problem.
I'm going to send out this file as well. I will send it out at the end of our session. I'll send a version of this completed file at the end of our session. We'll have some notes. We'll include some of these functions in it. So yeah. So you guys will get that in the chat at the end of the session.
Jamie, there was a question that said you showed some formulas where you built something and then the actual syntax of the formula popped up above it, and the question was how did you do that when you made this the actual formula itself pop up in its own cell so people could see the syntax? I think on the previous sheet.
I'm cheating. I'm using something called formula text. We use it for teaching a lot. I had pre-formatted this sheet with a bunch of formula text formulas. For any function in Excel, anytime that we enter a formula into a cell, I can use something called formula text in order to see what the formula is inside any given cell. So really handy when you're teaching or when you're trying to explain a model to somebody to use that occasionally. I've just sort of cheated a bit and preset our sheet with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great feature to allow you to see the formula that's going on behind the results of something.
Okay.
There was a question that said, how do you ensure you don't see the formula? Do you just hide the column?
So for example, like these formulas that I'm showing here, would I just hide that column? Yeah, I could hide this column, absolutely. I could hide that row if I don't want to see that formula. But like I said, in a normal sort of sheet, I wouldn't necessarily include these formulas either. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I think there might be some more coming in here as well. There's a question that just came in. Do these things work in Office 365 online, in the online version of Office 365?
Yes. In short, my short answer is yes. The long answer is I don't use it a ton. So I haven't seen if every single function works in Office 365, but I know that the concept of dynamic arrays works in the online version as well.
Okay, great.
And then somebody was asking, can you filter columns as well? Yes, absolutely. We can change what we're filtering based on. If I go into my filter function, well, yeah, with filter, you would have to just, you see the way that I'm referring to data lead underwriter right now? Data lead underwriter is a column, so it's going to filter based on columns, so it's going to filter out rows. If I were to give it a data set here, if data lead underwriter instead was in a row, it will filter out columns based on whether it matches this row or not. So yes, it's usable interchangeably for filter. And same thing with sort. We can tell it to sort by column or by row.
Did you want to jump into some of the last couple of things?
Yeah, why don't I cover a couple of more things here, and then we may have some time to come back to some additional questions.
I know I need a few more things.
Thanks for kind of managing that, Ian. Look, the last things that I really wanted to talk about here were what are some of the implications of this for financial modeling, right? We've talked a lot about sort of analysis type work that we can do, but I think that it's important that we think about what the implication is for modeling as well. And so I've built the simplest model possible for humanity here. This is just sales, hand-bombed in here, hard-coded, blue numbers, cost of goods sold, and I want to calculate a gross profit, right? The old way of the old way of doing this in Excel was to take your sales minus your cost of goods sold, right? Sales minus cost of goods sold. I would hit enter. I would copy that formula across the entire range. But with dynamic arrays, we can do this a little bit differently. I can say equals sales and give it a reference to the entire sales range minus cost of goods sold and give it a reference to the entire cost of goods sold range. This is now a single formula that will spill out to populate that entire data set. So what I have now is I've entered one single formula and it's populated, in this case, 120 columns worth of data. This is really handy to avoid having to copy formulas across rows. So something that we can use, but again, be cautious whether your users are going to have access to these or not. So the way that we used to get pieces of information from other places within our model is we used to give direct links, right? We talk about this all the time in our Building a Model course, this concept of if you need a piece of information, link to it, repeat it where you need it to do a calculation. We would then need to copy and paste that formula across a range of cells in order to get the information that we needed. Now we can do it with a single formula. Equals this range of data, our information spills out of the cell, we get all the information that we actually need. So those are handy ways that we might be able to use this. Again, I always caution a little bit here, just until we get wider adoption, it's probably important to make sure that this file wouldn't go to other people who don't have Office 365, right? So it's important to consider that in advance. But
Jamie,
some of the interesting stuff that we
Jamie, do you mind if I interrupt you for one thing here? This is I know that people that have tried using this before when they install a new version of Excel 365. It happened to me originally when people are just learning this capability. They actually get very frustrated with the spilling. You'll start using functions, stuff's going to start spilling all over the place. It'll be like you've used Excel for the first time again. Stuff's going to happen you're not expecting, and spills will go all over the place. And is there a way to turn that off if you don't want to be having the spilling working?
Absolutely there is. So I'm just going to catch these notes up a little bit. There's a couple of functions we didn't have time to talk about. We are going to talk about offset and transpose in a minute, but the one that I want to mention is stop spilling, you blasted machine. I got this comment from a lot of folks at Marquee, and we're heavy Excel users. When we first started seeing this, it was terrifying and new, and those are not things that I like in Excel. So if we want it to stop spilling, I don't want information to spill out of cells. We have to use something called the intersect operator, and it's the @ sign in Excel. And so what the intersect operator allows me to do, right? In older versions of Excel, if I had have given Excel a reference to a whole range of cells, it would have given me a single result, the result in the correct column, right? And if I want it to do that, if I don't want Excel to do this fancy new stuff that we're showing here, I can do the same thing. I can use that same formula. I could say equals at this range. And so what's going to happen is it is going to get the value in the same column. This is what older Excel did when you tried to use formulas like this, right? This is how we can defeat that spilling behavior, right? We can use this @ sign in order to do it. So that's called the intersect operator, and I'll have some notes in this notes file that deal with it. There's some rules to how it works. Typically, we're going to get the value that's in the same row or column as where we're entering the formula, but there's other rules as well. If it's an array, we won't always get the information that we want, but keep that in the back of your mind. If Excel ever does this and you don't want it to, use the intersect operator to stop it, the @ sign. So that, I know, walked a lot of folks at Marquee back off the ledge. It's okay, we can use the old version now. So is that what you're kind of getting at, Ian? I think that's what you're looking for.
That's what I was hoping you would show, because that @ sign is going to be extremely important and helpful for people if they want to go back to the old functionality as they're learning this, because it is a little bit jarring at first when you start using it and building a formula and it starts spilling into cells that you weren't wanting or intending. So yes, it is critical to know that when you start using this.
Yeah, so it's it is important to understand how to make Excel do old things that we wanted it to do. So look, there's kind of one more big topic that I wanted to touch on here, and then I know we're kind of right close to the end of our lunch hour here. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was a lot of times we will need to build sort of summary income statements, right? So let's imagine that I wanted to build a summary tab that's only going to include a subset of my model. This is a 10-year monthly projection, right? But maybe for the purposes of the board, every quarter I want to show them the next 6 months or 12 months or 9 months. And I just want that particular information, right? So what we can do in order to do this is we can take advantage of a old function in Excel that has really good dynamic array implications. And that's something called the offset function. So I can use equals offset. Well, the whole way the offset function works, and if you want to know more about this, we cover it in a lot of detail in our Excel courses, is it will start at a particular cell. In this case, I want us to start with the first month in our model, and it will move a certain number of rows from that cell and a certain number of columns from that cell. In this case, I don't actually want it to move at all from that cell, but what I do want is I want to take advantage of these height and width arguments at the end. So I can get a particular set of data that's a certain width and a certain height, and it's going to spill out of this cell. So in this case, I want to get dates on this line. So I want to get dates, they're 1 row high, but the important thing here is that I can use my width, and I can set my width equal to some number that could potentially change. So 9 months worth of data, right? Using that offset function, I am going to spill out 9 months worth of data right now. I can take that formula and I can copy it down to also get sales, cost of goods sold, and gross profit. And I could change this to 3 months or to 5 months or to 2 months. And it's going to update dynamically on the fly because I'm changing the width of each of these strings of data that I'm pulling in. So this is really powerful. The last function I want to show is the transpose function. There are some really weird people in the world for some reason who like to have models where the numbers are in columns. I kind of joke about it because it happens a lot in oil and gas. It always seems strange to me when I see it. I think resource businesses in particular tend to do that a lot, where your years are along rows and then you've got sales, cost of goods sold, all of that stuff along the top. If I ever want to rotate information, I can use something called the transpose function. The transpose function will take data and turn it on its side. I can transpose that whole range of data in one shot. Again, transpose is an old function from Excel. It just works really, really well with dynamic arrays. So that kind of gets to the end of what I wanted to talk about. There were a couple of notes that I just wanted to touch on here. The first one is I'm going to send out that completed version of the spreadsheet here in a moment. I talk about applications and modeling, and then I talked about some of the errors that we can run into with spilling, right? So the biggest thing you'll run across is if you use this spilling behavior, you will get spill errors. These spill errors are just telling you Excel is trying to spill something and it can't. In this case, I've got a cell with some data in it that's in the way. So it won't override existing data in a spreadsheet. It'll just give you a spill error and show you where it's trying to spill information. So keep an eye out for those. The other big thing is those words of caution that I talked about. 750 million Excel users worldwide, 45 million on Office 365. These dynamic array functions that generate dynamic arrays, they can convert into traditional array formulas, but I got no guarantees that that's going to work. Be very, very careful about sharing this. So thank you everyone for joining, spending an hour over your lunch talking about Excel. We still have close to 160 people. That's incredible.
That's amazing.
So thank you all for joining. We will have more details about this full session where we'll kind of put people through an assignment where we'll cover these in a lot more detail. It feels like you were drinking from a fire hose in this session. We were just trying to show a lot of cool applications of this. I could spend probably a full day talking about these new features. But we'll spend at least a half a day on December 10th. So you'll get information about that if you're interested in learning more. I am going to put a completed version of this file into the chat. So anybody who wants these notes, please stick around for a moment, and you will.
Jamie, why don't you do that right now as I just make a wrap-up comment? Then I'll give you.
Sure. Ian, go ahead, and I'll
buy you some time as you do that. I want to thank everyone first of all for turning up today. Jamie's going to post a file in the chat if you want to hang on for a second. But I want to say, I mean, I've been teaching Excel for over 20 years, and this is easily, probably the largest change that I have seen in one shot. You're all going to have to know this at some point because Microsoft's going to force you, as you know, they always do. They introduce things gently and softly at first, but as you all know, older versions will continue to become outdated, discontinued, unsupported, and eventually everyone's going to be on a version within the next couple of years of Excel that uses this functionality, that uses these techniques. So this is going to be something that you will all need to become familiar with over time. And, for me, some of the big takeaways are recognizing that Excel is going to try and populate formulas for you. It's going to try and fill ranges. And when you use certain features like sorting and filtering, you're going to have dynamic capability for things to continuously change. It was very complex in the past to kind of build dynamic sorting and dynamic filtering. So there's a lot of really powerful features. And again, today was just intended to introduce you to these changes, right? We weren't trying to, wasn't a training session, but just to introduce you to what's happening and what Excel is talking about, just so you have exposure to where the future of Excel is headed. If we didn't, I apologize. If we did not get to every question, there are some questions we didn't cover. If you have any other questions, please don't be shy. If you know my email address, I recognize a bunch of people in the session today. Feel free to email me or Jamie. We'll get an answer back to you as soon as we can. And the last thing is, as someone said, how do you get better at this stuff? Well, fundamentally, it's hard to appreciate this stuff if you don't already have a strong understanding of what Excel can do now. So if you don't know what Excel is really capable of today, it's hard to appreciate some of the differences and of these features. So we do have a couple of online self-study courses that get quite advanced on some of Excel's existing capability. We're going to build content around some of this new capability. And as Jamie talked about, we're going to be offering a half-day program soon. But stay close to us, stay tuned. We'll continue to make sure that this is known and available so you guys can continue to build these skills. So we're just a minute ahead. So again, thank you all for sharing your notes and comments. Jamie, is there anything else you want to add before we part ways here? I think we're good to go then.
No, there were some people saying they're unable to open the file that was in the chat.
We'll email it then.
Sometimes it happens with Zoom chat. I will email it. We're going to follow up with information about the upcoming training session on this anyway. So I will email it out when I send that email.
Excellent.
Out. We won't blast you with emails. We'll just send you one email that has training details and this spreadsheet as well.
So thanks everyone for coming. That'll wrap it up for today. Thank you, Jamie, and everyone for joining us. Great to see all of you. Wonderful to have so many people here, and be in touch and let us know if you have any further questions. Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thanks all. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much, Jamie. That was very good.
Thanks, George.
Thanks, everybody. That's awesome.
And thanks, Ian, for putting this on for free. It's nice.
No problem, George. Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Jamie, awesome job. Good to see you leading the session.
Hey, Hassan. How are you?
I'm sticking around to say hi to Hassan as well. Hey, Hassan.
How are you doing, Phil?
Good, man. You look good, buddy.
It's got to be awfully late there, isn't it?
It's
I guess it's late day. Yeah.
It's 10 p.m. Yeah. So.
But it's his Friday night. This is your weekend, right?
What's up, Hassan? What's up, Jay-Z?
How are you, buddy?
I read a lot about you.
Yeah, some things you didn't know. Tim wrote it all.
How's everyone doing? Well, I guess there's some others.
Where are you in your place?